beyond that static. I've always been deeply drawn to the unknown, the kind of mysteries that hide just beyond what we can explain. Over the years, I've tried several rituals meant to connect with the spiritual world. None of them ever worked, at least not until recently. One late night while aimlessly scrolling through obscure forums, I stumbled upon something called tape whispers. It was said to be a way to bridge the gap between our world and theirs, using nothing but a tape recorder. Curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to try and reach out to someone I'd only ever heard about in stories. My great-grandfather. He passed away long before I was born. So I gathered the equipment, an old cassette recorder, a pack of blank tapes, and a quiet room. So one chilly evening, I turned off the lights. I sat cross-legged on the floor and I pressed record. I spoke softly into the silence, asking him to speak to me if he could. When I rewound and played the tape back, there was nothing but the usual static until I heard it. A low murmur, faint, almost like a breath brushing against my ear. At first, I thought it was interference, but when I replayed it, the whisper became clearer. It was a man's voice, shaky and hoarse. My heart pounded. I told myself it had to be him. Night after night, I repeated the experiment, and each time the voice grew more distinct, though never really loud, always just beyond full understanding. Along with the excitement came a strange exhaustion. My nights grew shorter and my body heavier and my appetite faded. I convinced myself it was just lack of sleep. But then the shadows came. First at the edge of my vision, then standing by my door. There were knocks at odd hours, and soft at first and then louder. I'd wake to the sensation that someone was standing beside my bed even though I was alone. And my room, once my sanctuary, felt cold and foreign. I tried to stop. I wrapped the tape in cloth. I locked it in a wooden box. I shoved it to the back of a closet in the attic. I thought that would be enough. But the whispers didn't stop. They no longer lived on the tape, and they lived in the walls, in the air, and the silence. Desperate, I turned to people who claimed to know about these things. Some warned I might have opened a door I didn't know how to close. Others said I needed to destroy the tape completely. In the end, I reached out to a parapsychologist who listened without judgment. He told me that I had unintentionally left a kind of invitation beyond that static. I've always been deeply drawn to the unknown, the kind of mysteries that hide just beyond what we can explain. Over the years, I've tried several rituals meant to connect with the spiritual world. None of them ever worked, at least not until recently. One late night while aimlessly scrolling through obscure forums, I stumbled upon something called tape whispers. It was said to be a way to bridge the gap between our world and theirs, using nothing but a tape recorder. Curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to try and reach out to someone I'd only ever heard about in Homer and the Haunted Isles. I once ran my own small construction business with a crew of 6. We weren't big, but we were steady, and I was proud of it. I even spent $300 on a local radio ad, which, as it turned out, aired once at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. That was some top-tier marketing genius right there. Anyway, one day my body decided it had had enough of my nonsense. I had a heart attack right in the middle of planting a row of trees on a 5-acre job site, and I staggered across the lawn, flopped down on the damp grass. I waited to see whether it would be the EMTs or the Reaper showing up first. That moment pretty much signed the death certificate for my business. My crew was good, but not good enough to keep the whole machine running. My doctor made it clear I wasn't going back to heavy lifting anytime soon. So I looked for something low stress, something I could just drift through while healing. And that's how I ended up at the dollar den down the road doing the easiest gig I could find, stocking shelves and minding my own business. That's also how I met Homer. I started out just placing products on shelves, letting my mind float in a warm fog, and sometimes I'd get this faint shimmer in the air behind me, like a puff of mist caught in the wrong place. I didn't pay much attention. I've seen stranger things in my time. After a few days, my new coworker warmed up to me, and they started sharing little stories once they realized I wasn't the type to spook easily. That's when Homer's name first came up, and apparently Homer listened too. The first big, "Homer, hello," it came during a quiet evening in the pet food aisle. I heard a thunderous wham-bam-boom, the kind that usually means somebody just tipped over a whole display of dog food. I hustled to the next aisle, and there was nothing, no boxes, no people, just silence. Before I could even process wham-bam-boom again, now 2 aisles over, I sighed, I wandered around, I found nothing, and calmly told the air, "All right, buddy, enough of that, I'm working here." And just like that, silence. Polite little rascal. Later, I asked one of the cashiers if she'd heard the noise. She gave me the classic, "I hope you don't think I'm crazy" look and said, "Okay, don't freak out, but," and told me about Homer, the store's unofficial ghost. They'd had nights where right after locking the doors, they'd hear a man coughing somewhere deep in the aisles. They'd call out, get no answer, hear footsteps swishing just 1 aisle over. And eventually, after realizing it was a Homer game, they'd retreat only for a bag of Tide Pods to go skidding down the aisle after them like a playful cat. Needless to say, Homer had a flair for drama. Homer doesn't bother anyone maliciously. He'll nudge a shopping cart across an empty aisle. Maybe set off the motion alarm by the register just to make me stop what I'm doing. When I tell him to knock it off, he usually does, and then he goes to mess with the automatic doors standing in the way, so that way they open and close until somebody acknowledges him. Once, a woman who looked like she was walking straight out of a ghost hunting movie, they wandered in. They looked around for a minute and said to me casually, "There's something here, but don't worry, it's friendly." Then she paid for her gum and left like that was the most normal thing in the world. My favorite Homer prank happened one night after my friend decided to leave a giant teddy bear on the conveyor belt holding a sign in red marker saying, "I'm watching you." Homer never wanted to waste good material. He set off the store alarms after closing. When the manager came in alone to check, the first thing she saw in the harsh fluorescent light was that bear staring right at her. If you've ever watched a B horror movie, you can imagine the scream she let out. Now, if I work a shift and don't hear a single peep from him, it feels too quiet. Management even calls him my buddy, as in, "Your buddy was active last night, he knocked over the seasonal display again." I told Homer I was writing this down. It's only polite to let a ghost know when they're being documented. And as I type this, I swear I can feel him peeking over my shoulder amused. I figure he likes hanging around me because of something far stranger than that happened to me involving a being I called Grandma Moose's. Well, that's a good name. But that's a story for another day, my friends. Another day. I sort of demand Grandma Moose's now, but okay, I'll oblige. The Visitor in the Trees. I was pulling into my small cabin. It's tucked deep in the hills of Tennessee. It's after another long shift of the old witching willow gas and go, tale for another night. The gravel crunched under my tires as I drove the quarter-mile stretch of driveway running right alongside the state wildlife refuge. The porch light was on. It was warm and steady like a lighthouse in the dark. I parked the truck and I called out to Boone, my lazy old blue tick hound, who would normally bolt straight to the porch the second I unclip his lead, but this time, Boone didn't do his usual routine. Instead, he tore off into the backwoods behind the shed, tail high, barking once before disappearing into the night. I cursed under my breath, wondering what kind of fool critter he was chasing, but by the time I got to the porch, there he was, trotting out from the opposite side like nothing happened. I muttered a few colorful names his way. He just wagged his tail and went inside easy as pie. Dinner time came, the dogs got fed, and I threw together a quick meal for the missus and me. We settled into bed in the kind of quiet evening that kind of drips away slowly, just the soft sound of crickets and the hum of the AC. I didn't know then that we were being watched. Mounted on the wall across from our bed is a 32-inch monitor feeding 4 night vision cameras with overlapping IR lights around the property. One of my better ideas. Out of a habit, I glanced at the screen mid-Netflix and saw something strange on camera number 2. The one facing the tree line, maybe 40 yards out. And there it was, a glowing sphere, bright and blindingly bright. It was hovering maybe 25 feet off the ground, dead still like it had been waiting. I frowned. I pointed toward the screen, about to say, "Honey, what's..." Then the light vanished. Just like that, like a soap bubble popped, and then the cameras blinked. Oh yeah, feel that pucker. Same here. Like any reasonable folks, we made sure the doors and windows were locked, grabbed a couple of firearms, and, well, most people would have stayed under the bed, but I've never been most people. Laced up my boots, grabbed my mag light, my old .45, stepped out into the night. The air was thick, the kind that sticks to your skin. Moved toward the back where I keep the raised beds and barrels full of dirt. My flashlight beam was cutting through the dark like a blade, and first sweep over the spot where that light had been, I caught 2 eyes shining back at me. "Raccoon," I muttered. Relaxing a hair, I panned left and nothing, and right nothing, and back to the eyes. "Raccoon," I repeated, trying to convince myself. And then the raccoon straightened up on its hind legs. Way too tall for any raccoon, and a second pair of eyes blinked open just beneath the first. Super pucker. This would have been a fine moment to bolt. But no, I even surprised myself. I stood there, and in the cheeriest voice I could manage, I called out, "Hi there, you don't need to be scared, I won't hurt you. Please don't hurt me either, you're welcome to come closer, but not inside." The eyes moved fast. And maybe this is where a normal story ends, with me slamming the door and crawling under the bed, but what kind of story would that be? So my pulse was going so hard it felt like the night was breathing with me, and the grass shifted and the shape moved closer, flickering in and out of the beam, until finally, the great fearsome creature revealed itself. 2 barn cats standing on a stump, probably wondering why the walking food dispenser was yelling at them. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. Back inside, Baby Doll was already scrubbing through the footage, and that's when things stopped being funny. No matter how many times she rewound that recording, there is a perfect blank spot. 11 seconds missing clean out of the feed, and not like the usual camera hiccup. The footage looked like somebody had snipped the tape and glued it back together smooth. No flash of light, no glitch, no nothing. The next afternoon, I ran into the landlord's handyman. He was over by the road and started telling him the tale. Before I got to the good part, he cut me off. "You saw it too." Turns out, the back trailer folks had been watching that same hovering light for 5 nights straight. thought we put up some kind of fancy spotlight, but it wasn't ours. And that meant something was out there watching us. Not them, not the woods in general, but us. It knew when we noticed. It could mess with the hard wire, offline security system. It was like it was flipping a switch. Waited until I stepped back inside before it cleaned up its tracks. Later, when I told the story, folks threw out all kinds of ideas. Aliens, fae, or ley lines, or swamp gas. Some even said they'd heard of other glowing sphere sightings paired with strange cat encounters. All I know is this. Those woods have teeth, and that sphere, it's not the strangest thing that's ever come calling. Whispers in the hallway. Okay, so basically, I was raised in a super traditional Christian family. I never really bought this idea of ghosts. Oh no, my phone's turning off. Struggles to plug in. Now get shocked. Where was I? I never really bought into the idea of ghosts the same way people do, but I've always believed there's something else out there, not holy, not human, and not exactly friendly. Even now, I'm just kind of still skeptical about the whole spirits of the dead just vibing around thing. Still, I've always loved horror movies, and I do admit, sometimes other people's stories just couldn't be explained away. Keep this in mind, it's important for what happens later. When I was in high school, my closest friend was a girl who was kind of eccentric and lived for attention. Let's call her Sierra. I basically spent every weekend at her house. And after graduation, I was there more often than at my own. Her house never once gave me the creeps, at least not at first. One night, Sierra called me, practically hysterical, swearing that somebody had broken in. She said she heard footsteps and soft thuds upstairs. Since I lived barely 3 minutes away, I jumped in my car and drove over. The doors were all locked tight, and I, being an idiot, started stomping through the house, pretending to be some wannabe action hero yelling, "All right, Mr. Murderer, show yourself." She laughed and calmed down, and honestly, it helped me relax too. Weeks went by. We forgot about it, until Sierra told me the shower in the upstairs bathroom finally got fixed. She said every time she used it, she'd feel like somebody was watching her, and the light would flicker. Her mom even once said the door wouldn't open like something was holding it shut from the other side. I brushed it off, told myself it was old wiring or the door frame swelling. But then, weird little things started piling up. Their house had 2 levels. Her parents' space was downstairs, and Sierra's room plus a spare room were upstairs. 2 spots suddenly started making my skin crawl. The upstairs hallway and the storage room downstairs. I'd catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye in that hallway. Storage room was always unnaturally cold, even in July. I tried to explain it away with what I'd read online, and something about low-frequency sound messing with your brain, and it worked for a while. One night after a late shift at work, I came over and Sierra went downstairs to shower. I was lying on her bed with my back to the door when I got this intense, almost physical feeling of being stared at. You know how sometimes you can hear silence in the wrong way, like the quiet has weight to it? That's what it felt like. I sat up expecting to see her little brother trying to mess with me. Doorway was empty. I couldn't shake it. Felt like somebody was slowly walking toward me. Except no one was there. I sat frozen for what felt like forever until Sierra came back upstairs, feeling snapped away like a rubber band. When I told her, she kind of laughed and said, "Oh, it's just Grandpa. He used to live here, and he'd like us sometimes." She explained that her mom had actually planned to burn sage, but then dreamt her dad told her not to, that it was him playing, in quotes. It didn't make me feel any better, I just stayed anyway. That night, I had one of the worst nightmares of my life. Someone whispering in a language I couldn't understand. Something chasing me down a hallway, the feeling of being cornered, and it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, I kept having those nightmares, not every night, but often enough to feel trapped. One time, sleeping at my boyfriend's place, I had sleep paralysis, and in this dream, something opened his bedroom door and crawled across the ceiling, spider-like. Its limbs too long, its head too human. I couldn't move. I tried to call his name and nothing would come out, and when I fell back asleep, the nightmare picked up exactly where it had paused. When I texted Sierra's mom, she just said, "Don't worry, it's her grandpa, he's harmless." But after a while, it wasn't just the nightmares that bothered me. Sierra herself started acting weird and cozying up to my ex, sending me snaps of them hanging out, like accidentally finding my new boyfriend's Twitch and flirting with him on stream. It got ugly fast. When I cut her off completely, the nightmares just stopped. I still think about it sometimes. Maybe it was stress, and maybe something really was there. Either way, that house still gives me chills just thinking about it. If you're stuck dealing with somebody who's working against your existence, you will have an increased frequency of nightmares, especially if they're being real dodgy about it. I'm all too familiar. The house that never sleeps. I've always experienced things that most people might call super normal. I've usually managed to find some kind of explanation for them, but this time, I honestly can't. I lived with my grandparents until I was about 6 or 7. My sister and I shared a small room near the middle of the hallway. My mom's bedroom at the very end was right next to ours. When I was little, I used to see a boy, maybe around 9 years old, standing in her doorway almost every night. Messy dark hair, wore a long striped pajama shirt, and just stared. He never moved, he never spoke. So after a while, I stopped being afraid. As I grew up, I convinced myself it must have been some kind of dream or made-up memory. Honestly, didn't give it much thought again. But a few years ago, I casually told my mom about it, and her face went pale. She said there were nights she heard my sister and me calling out to her. But when she came to check, we'd both be just fast asleep. Then she told me something that still gives me chills. One night she saw the same boy standing in her doorway. She blinked and he was gone. Later, my grandpa mentioned seeing a boy walking down the hallway toward our rooms, barefoot and silent. I remember just brushing it off at the time, trying not to get it in my head, and, well, buckle up, everybody. Fast forward to last October. I moved back in with my grandparents, and I'm 17 now. First night back, I slept in my old room. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to find a woman standing at the corner near my desk. She was tall, with long dark blonde hair, wore a loose pale gray dress that almost shimmered in the dark. I sat up frozen, and then she turned slowly and walked out of my room. Trying to tell myself it was just a vivid dream, and those do happen. But yesterday morning, my grandpa called me, sounding unsettled, and he said he didn't know why, but he had to tell me something. He said he woke up just at the first light that was creeping in. At the foot of his bed stood a woman. He couldn't see her face clearly, but she was wearing a pale dress, and just like the one I'd seen. She didn't move. She stood there for several seconds. When he turned to check on my grandma, she was already asleep. When he looked back, the woman was walking out of their room. That's when their dog, who'd been sleeping in the hallway, went crazy, barking and growling. Grandpa then heard distinct heavy footsteps going down the stairs while the dog stayed rigid at the top, barking toward the darkness. Grandpa isn't somebody who tells ghost stories. He's lived in that house for over 20 years, never once mentioned anything like this. Between what I saw, what he saw, and the weird knocking and doors opening on their own lately, I'm starting to feel unsettled. Never really believed in full-body apparitions before, but now I'm not so sure. The Unexpected Visitor. This happened last Wednesday, and honestly, it's been playing in a loop in my mind ever since then. Maybe someone out there has a logical explanation. I still can't quite make sense of it myself. Bit of context first. My partner, our 2 kids, and I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a fairly typical suburban neighborhood. House was built in the late 1980s, and we bought it from an elderly couple who had lived here forever. It's a 2-story house with a little wraparound porch, attached garage that connects to the kitchen through a narrow mudroom. Because of ongoing health issues, I stay home most days. My husband usually manages to swing by for a quick lunch around 12:15. He does that before heading back to work. He always comes in through the garage, and the door is impossible to miss when it opens. It sounds like a freight train rattling through the house. Last week, I'm sitting at the kitchen table. I'm working on a quilting project. I had some soft instrumental music playing and was carefully pinning fabric pieces together on the floor. My head was down, fully focused, and when I heard slow, steady steps coming from the mudroom to the kitchen, whoever it was stopped a few feet away from me. A deep male voice said casually, "Oh, hi." Whole thing happened so naturally, I didn't even look up. I just laughed and said, "You scared me. I didn't hear you come in." I was thinking it was my husband getting home a little early. Told him to give me a second while I finished what I was doing. I then heard the footsteps continue past me toward the den, exactly where a small home office is. But something about it felt off. I checked the clock and it was only 10:20 a.m., way too early for him to be home. I turned off the radio, called his name. No answer. I walked through every room on the first floor and then upstairs. Nothing. I even stepped out onto the porch to check if his car was in the driveway, and it wasn't. I hadn't heard the garage door, and I hadn't heard the front door either. But I had heard those footsteps. I had seen someone standing there out of the corner of my eye, and I could feel that presence in the kitchen with me. The voice had been low and warm, and the way he said hi sounded genuinely surprised, almost like he hadn't expected me to be there. Even heard him walking away. When my husband came home at his usual time, the first thing I blurted out was, "Were you home earlier?" He gave me a confused look and said no. He'd been stuck in back-to-back meetings all morning. And after that, we both went through the house together, checking doors and windows, and everything was locked. Can't stop replaying the sound of those footsteps and that voice in my head. A breeze through the curtains. I'll pick science and research over spiritual explanations any day. I genuinely believe that anything, no matter how odd, can eventually be understood if we observe closely enough. But there's one memory from my childhood that stayed with me for years, mostly because I just can't explain it. So here's my story, what made me stop and wonder. I was around 11. My grandfather gave me the mailing address of his cousin's husband, Robert. He said we might get along because Robert was a history buff and loved writing letters. My grandfather's always been pretty big on keeping family connections alive. He'll find the most distant relative and still insist we send them holiday cards. To humor him, I sent Robert a handwritten note. That was the start of a surprisingly warm correspondence. Every couple of weeks, I'd get a letter back, and he'd write about books he'd read and historical tidbits and stories from when he was young. In return, I'd tell him about school and what I was reading. We wrote to each other for almost 2 years, actually. But after a while, his letters slowed down. He had Parkinson's and it was becoming harder for him to hold a pen. When I was about 13, he came to visit. I remember feeling awkward, like he'd know how childish my old letters had been, but it turned out to be gentle and funny, and being around him felt easy. He gave me a wooden bookmark, hand-carved with a simple engraving. Keep looking, keep wondering. I think he saw right through my self-conscious teenage shell. Not long after, he passed away. Even though we'd never lived near each other or spent much time together, his kindness left a real mark on me. I kept that bookmark in my nightstand. A few days after hearing the news, I sat on the floor beside my bed holding it. My window was just to my right, a big one that overlooked the backyard. I ran my thumb over the carved letters and thought about all the letters that we'd exchanged. And then it happened. The sheer curtain next to the window swept sharply to the side, as if somebody had dragged a hand through it. Not a gentle flutter, a clean, strong movement. The window was closed tight. The heater wasn't on. The air was still. I didn't feel cold or warm, no ghostly presence. But there was this quiet, weightless moment, like somebody had nodded at me and left. I checked everything. Window locked, no vents nearby. Didn't have any pets to blame it on, and yet the image of that curtain moving stayed burned into my memory. To this day, I don't claim it was anything supernatural, but I also can't explain it, and honestly, I kind of like that I can't. If you're usually skeptical like me, I'd love to hear your stories too. The ones that make you pause. Not because you believe in ghosts, but because something just didn't fit. Boy, do I have some of those. Not even supernatural ones. Regular, crazy life ones. Whispers in the Old House. The house that I currently live in, and have lived in for nearly a decade now, was built by my great-grandfather on my father's side. It's quietly stood on the same piece of land through generations, sheltering countless family stories. My dad, my aunt, and even a few of my older cousins all spent part of their childhoods here. It's a house that carries a certain reputation in our family. Not because it's particularly big or particularly beautiful, but because of the strange, almost unexplainable things that seem to happen inside of it. I've never been the kind of person to immediately believe in ghosts, but the house has a way of making you question what you know. I'm going to share a few experiences below, and maybe somebody can tell me if this all sounds like a classic haunting or just a sensitive family living in an old house full of echoes. My dad's stories. Back when my dad was a teenager, he used to talk about strange footsteps and flickering lights. And one particular night, he swore he saw the hallway lamp swing slowly back and forth like somebody had brushed against it. Except everybody else was asleep, and another time a framed photo fell from a shelf in the living room without any reason. The weirdest thing for him, though, was the whistling. Late at night, he would hear a faint whistle like somebody trying to call a dog drifting in from the back porch. When he opened the door, the sound would vanish completely. My grandfather's encounter. When my grandfather lived here after retiring, he told me about something that gave me chills. He'd go to bed around the same time every night. And one evening, when he pulled the blanket over himself, he clearly felt the weight of someone sitting at the end of the bed. He froze, thinking maybe it was my dad or my aunt, but when he turned on the bedside lamp, the room was empty. The indentation was still there. My own experiences. Personally, I've never had furniture fly across the room or doors slam shut on their own. The oddest thing that happened to me is the kitchen door opening slowly. It's as if it's nudged by someone invisible. I used to think it was just wind, but it happens even when all the windows are shut. Shadow figures, though, that's another story. The first time I saw one, I was about 11. I woke up thirsty in the middle of the night and walked into the hallway. I saw a tall, dark silhouette standing by the bathroom door. It didn't move, it just stood there. I blinked and it was gone. But the scariest moment happened a few years later. I was lying in bed and I saw a figure pass by my doorway. It looked exactly like my dad. The build, the walk, even the familiar slouch of his shoulders. Thought maybe he was checking if I was asleep. A minute later he came out of his room, though. Opposite end of the hall. Said he hadn't left his bed. The Whisper. About a year ago, something happened that still makes my heart race when I think about it. I was reading on my bed with the door closed. House was silent. Suddenly, I heard somebody whisper my name. It was soft and almost gentle, like my aunt's voice. I turned around expecting to see her standing at the door, but the door was still shut and everyone else had already gone out to sleep. I prayed out loud like my family always does when something weird happens. And that night, nothing else followed. The house has passed. This house has seen a lot. My great-grandfather built it after returning from war, and over the years, a few people have passed away here. Some peacefully, some not. One of the more painful family stories involved a late-night break-in decades ago. It's when somebody had to defend themselves from a violent man. My dad says the hallways where it happened never quite feels right. How we cope. Whenever something happens, whether it's a voice, a shadow, or a feeling, we gather and pray over the house, and my aunt burned sage. My grandfather used to leave a lamp on in the kitchen, for the night wanderers, as he called them. It didn't stop everything, but it helps. And over time, the fears turned into a kind of wary acceptance. The house has been here long before me, and it'll probably outlive me too. Whether it's truly haunted or just carrying the weight of too many memories, I've learned to live with its whispers. Whispers by the window. More whispers, well, you know. This happened sometime last year, and I'm only sharing it now since things have been quiet for a while. It started with what I thought was just a typical fever. My little girl had a temperature that went up and down, and nothing unusual for a toddler, I guess. Her doctor said the usual: keep her hydrated and let her rest, give her meds if needed. We followed everything carefully. By the third night, though, her fever was still unpredictable, and I tried calling her doctor again. We couldn't reach her. I didn't want to bring my daughter to anyone else, and we trust her doctor more than anyone. Every time we tried other clinics before, it never really helped. What unsettled me was how my daughter started acting strange at night. She would sit up suddenly and cry without a sound, stare out the window beside her bed. It wasn't constant, but she kept doing it, looking and crying and then freezing like she was listening to something only she could hear. We decided to call a family friend, and she's an old woman with this odd earthy scent. Not bad, just like she'd been walking through a forest. People in our town called her a witch doctor, or an albulario. Albulario. So she helped many people before, and even me when I was little, though I never really knew if it was real or just a coincidence. I told her my daughter's name over the phone. She wrote it down on a small piece of paper, and after listening quietly, she said something that made my stomach twist. "She's not just sick," she whispered. "She's being followed." So I laughed nervously, and I told her there was, no one else in the house. But she shook her head. How do you know she shook her head if it was over the phone? I'm being pedantic. Not someone living, she said. Something's attached to her and it's playing with her and calling her. She explained that toddlers are more sensitive and their eyes still open to things adults can't see. And that's why she looked so tired, the old woman said when she finally saw my daughter. She's not just crying because she's sick, she's asking for it to stop. She folded the paper with my daughter's name and whispered it like a secret and walked outside without letting us follow. Her daughter told us no one should touch or see where she'd throw it. When she came back, she gently ran her hand over my daughter's head and nothing changed right away. Before we left, she told us one last thing to do. Scatter salt and uncooked rice on the window. Speak kindly to her, wish for her to be free. Someone or something is envious of her. Keep a small jar of salt and rice hidden in the corner of your home. Don't remove it until the year ends. So, I asked her who it was. She looked at the window and then at my daughter and whispered, "It's not a thing, it's someone. Someone who doesn't want to let her go." And she left, murmuring words I didn't understand. When we got home, I did exactly what she said. Within 2 hours, my daughter was running around again, smiling like nothing had happened. Her fever dropped. I can't explain it, and maybe it was coincidence, maybe not, but ever since that night, she hasn't cried at the window again. The presence on the stairs. Presence with an E-N-C-E. Not the good kind. Don't know why I clarified that. In early 2015, my ex-partner and I had already split up. We're still living under the same roof, though, and the rent in that neighborhood was ridiculous. Neither of us could afford to move out just yet. We tried to keep our distance, separate rooms, separate lives. Our daughter, who was 3 at the time, stayed in the smaller bedroom next to his. It was a narrow 3-story townhouse, very end of a quiet street. My room being on the top floor, and the master bedroom, while my ex and our little girl stayed on 1 floor below us. The staircase curved up from the living room like a spine running through the house. And I've always struggled with insomnia, so I often stay up reading, and that night it was just past 2 in the morning. House was completely silent except for the occasional hum of the fridge, and I'm laying in bed with a mystery novel when I felt it. The air shifted like somebody had drawn a thick invisible curtain across the staircase. I couldn't hear anything, but something was moving, not walking, but crawling, slow and deliberately. It felt as if the entire house was holding its breath. I sat up, heart pounding, and opened the bedroom door. Hallway light spilled over the top of the stairs, and there was nothing. But the moment that light touched the steps, the suffocating feeling snapped, like somebody had popped a soap bubble. My cat bolted up the stairs for bristling. He dove under my bed and didn't come out until morning. I laughed nervously. I was convinced I was just overtired. But the instant I pulled the door shut again, the feeling returned, thick, cold, and wrong. I ended up sleeping with the overhead light on. Door cracked open just enough so a sliver of light fell down the stairwell. I tested it, closing the door, turning off the light, and waiting, and each time the wrongness crept back like something was waiting just out of sight. When the first pale light of dawn bled through the curtains, it vanished completely. I convinced myself it had just been in my head. 3 months later, I moved into a small apartment with my new boyfriend. He's a bit spiritual, so he burned sage the night before we officially settled in. And that first night alone, I lay on the couch and felt an enormous weight lift off of me. I hadn't realized how constant that low-grade dread had been, like a background hum I've gotten used to. 2 years after that, my ex posted online about finally moving out of the townhouse. And in a long post, he said how relieved he was to be done with that thing on the stairs. I froze when I read it. I had never told him anything, but he described the exact same presence, the same creeping feeling, the same fear when the lights were off. And he's a rational man, not one to talk about ghosts or shadows. Strange side note. Almost every couple in that row of townhouses eventually split up, and one couple next door had been together nearly 50 years, and even they divorced while living there. I can't prove what it was, but I believe something lived in the dark between those stairs, something that never quite crossed into the light. The Silent Guest. My 29-year-old female partner and me, a 31-year-old male. We have this on and off relationship almost 10 years now. During the first few years, I'd stay over at his apartment nearly every weekend. And some mornings I'd wake up with these odd bruises and small red lines across my arms and shoulder blades, places I couldn't possibly reach myself. Kept telling myself it was just me tossing and turning in my sleep, or maybe bumping into the bed frame without noticing. And one night after waking up with a long scratch down my left arm, I half-jokingly told him he must have a ghost roommate. He didn't laugh. Instead, his face got pale, and he quietly told me he had once seen a woman standing at the end of his bed when he was a child. A woman that no one else could see. That unsettled me, and after that I began noticing little things. Shoes moving slightly from where we left them. A book showing up days later in a drawer we never opened, or keys vanishing only to reappear in the kitchen counter. A year later, I found out I was pregnant. One early morning, exhausted and nauseous, I arrived at work way too early and decided to nap in the quiet, dim corner of this, I guess we could call it an archives room. I lay on my back, wrapped in a small throw blanket, and drifted off. Somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, I heard footsteps and chatter, like my coworkers had arrived, but when I tried to sit up, nothing happened. My body was frozen. I could only turn my head slightly, and there, right above me, was this pale figure with empty, dark eye sockets. It wasn't fully human, more like a bleached, distorted face staring down, and I panicked, turned away, and forced my eyes shut until the sensation passed. When I finally sat up, the room was silent. No one had arrived yet. As I moved into my third trimester, things became stranger. One night, sleeping at my own house, I opened my eyes and realized I couldn't move again. A tall figure cloaked in black stood in the hallway, its shape darker than the shadows behind it. It didn't speak or step forward, it only stood there, like it was waiting. I tried to scream, to call out to my father in the next room, but only air escaped my throat, and I don't remember how it ended, but only I woke up drenched in sweat with my heart pounding. I began sleeping only on my side after that, never on my back again. Always kept the bedroom door closed, too. After giving birth, nothing major happened for a while. But one afternoon when my daughter was about 2, she ran to the kitchen to fetch her favorite toy ball, then stopped dead at the doorway. Kitchen lights are on, she just stared at the back door as if something were standing there. She stepped backward slowly, eyes wide, refusing to go in. And as someone raised with a strong spiritual belief, I've always accepted that things beyond our sight can exist, and sometimes they attach themselves to people, not places. Can't prove what we've experienced is dangerous, but also can't shake the feeling that whatever is with us is not here to be kind. The Thing in the Pines. So as a little bit of background and explanation, my girlfriend and I had our first date at a half-forgotten churchyard. And ever since then, wandering around quiet graveyards has accidentally turned into our thing. Most of the time it's light-hearted and nervous laughter and ghost jokes whispered under our breath, tripping over uneven ground like a pair of idiots. But that night, it felt heavier. It wasn't her first time doing this, and we'd explored far creepier places without a problem. Just past 1 a.m., and we were restless. She was craving those sad little microwave burritos from the gas station. I wanted a cherry slushie, so we figured why not make a small night adventure out of it. We looked up old cemeteries in the area. She chose an old Catholic burial ground, one where a few of her relatives were actually buried. It wasn't far, maybe a 20-minute drive. The route there followed an old forest highway. No streetlights, only the sound of the wind pushing against the car. As we drove, we joked about, "Don't look into the trees," and how deer eyes at night look like ghosts waiting for someone dumb enough to stop. The woods were surprisingly beautiful. Waterfalls shimmering faintly in the moonlight, and jagged limestone glowing pale. We almost missed the entrance, a crooked iron gate half swallowed by the dark. The second we passed through, everything changed. My girlfriend gripped her stomach and said she felt like she'd swallowed bleach. I wasn't feeling much better. The cemetery itself was tiny. One narrow road leading to a loop at the back, maybe the length of a football field. I killed the engine. She asked if we should just turn around, and I, being a genius with bad decisions, said, "I'll just check it out. You can stay here." I walked a few steps and almost stepped right onto her great-grandmother's grave. That close. I turned back to tell her I found it. Decided to keep going, searching for her cousin's plot. My boots squished softly in the damp grass. But underneath I started hearing something else, a faint clicking. Not loud, but sharp, like tapping a fingernail against hollow metal. And each time I took a step, it came a beat later, like something walking with me. I went back, breath fogging in the cold air. Told her to keep the doors unlocked. And then, for no real reason I can really explain, I felt this pull like a rope around my ribs, tugging me toward the far edge where the pines started. And that's when I saw it. A small, shadowy shape crouched between headstones. A cat, or at least it looked like a cat. Tail low, eyes fixed, and I love cats. So of course, instead of leaving like a sane person, I moved closer. The clicking got louder and faster. My flashlight beam, it was caught on the tree line, but instead of lighting it up, the light just stopped. It's like it hit a wall of night. Then the dark shifted, and I can't describe it properly, like if somebody assembled a body wrong and pressed play. I stumbled back, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and then I ran. Harder than I've ever run. My girlfriend didn't wait for an explanation. The car door slammed before I even sat down. We shot down that forest road like the devil himself was chasing us. And on the way home, she told me she'd kept sweeping her eyes left and right, and every time she glanced at the pines, she knew something was there, watching. I keep trying to convince myself it was just an animal. I've hiked this state's woods my whole life, after all, and I know it lives out there. But whatever I saw didn't move anything like anything I know. And the cat, that's still bothering me. A lone cat surviving a Pennsylvania winter in the middle of the forest with no food or shelter, sitting in a graveyard at 1 a.m. doesn't make sense. Can't shake the feeling that we didn't imagine it. Whispers down the hall. When I was a third year in college, I was one of the RAs in a house on campus. My school was tucked away in a peninsula in Maine, and most of the buildings, except for the new dorms, were all old New England farmhouses and lodges. Some dated back to the mid-1800s. The house I was assigned to used to be an inn, complete with an attic suite and narrow back staircase. I was the senior RA that year, so I got the attic room at the very top of the house, right next to the old service stairs. Before classes started, the RAs stayed together for training week, which annoyingly was actually 2 weeks. Since my room was the only one upstairs, everybody just kind of took the second floor, louder, cozier, and more social, and I don't mind the quiet. About 3 days into training, odd things began to happen. I started finding smooth round pebbles in my drawers and under my shoes and inside closed boxes. Sometimes they're stacked in tiny towers of 2 or 3, and sometimes just a single stone. There was never a sound, never a sign of anyone sneaking in, and I told myself it had to be some silly prank. Then one night around 1:45, I woke to the sound of soft dragging footsteps on the wooden hallway outside my room. My first thought was that somebody needed help, maybe another RA. The steps stopped right in front of my door, and silence followed, thick and pressing silence. The next morning, when I asked if anybody had come upstairs, everybody swore they hadn't. Happened again the next night, and again the night after that, always at the same time. Someone suggested it might be the night watchman doing rounds, which made sense. I decided to meet him and clear my head. I set my alarm for 1:40. I opened my door and waited with my desk lamp on. At 1:45, the sound returned. Soft, deliberate steps climbing the service stairs. I could hear the boards creak closer and closer, and then the sound stopped right outside my door, and I looked out, and what do you know, no one. I whispered a shaky, "Hello?" And immediately the wind chime I had hanging from my curtain rod fell straight down. No breeze. Terrified, I slammed the door and kept every light in the room on until morning. The others laughed it off, said I was overtired, but then things got even worse. During orientation week, the house was empty in the mornings. That's because all the freshmen were at mandatory sessions. And one noon, I decided to nap, and when I woke, I took the back staircase down to the kitchen. To pass through, I had to cross a narrow landing between the stairwell and the laundry room. As I stepped onto the landing, the knob of the laundry room door began turning rapidly back and forth, like someone inside was desperate to get out. I called out, "Hold on, the door sticks, I'll help." No reply. The knob rattled harder. Then the door flung open, slammed open again, slammed harder, and then it slowly creaked open and just stayed that way. I stepped inside and it was empty. Not even a window open. I ran out of the house like my life depended on it. That night I walked through the hall whispering, "If someone's here, I don't want to fight. Please don't scare me. Let's just live here together peacefully." It felt ridiculous, but strangely, things quieted down after that. Sometimes I'd sense something sitting on the edge of my bed or hear the floor creak softly, but nothing threatening. Months later, around Halloween, I got bronchitis so bad I was barely functioning. My co-RA checked on me and complained that my room was a mess. Papers everywhere, clothes scattered, and everything chaotic. She told me to rest and said we'd clean it the next day. That night, half asleep, I heard a faint scraping. And at first, I thought it was mice. Then I saw my sweater slide across the floor, and then a notebook. Then stacks of paper shifted, neatly piling themselves against the wall. My heart stopped. I croaked out, "Thank you, but please stop, I just want to sleep." Then everything went still. The next morning, the piles are still there, tidy and sorted, and my co-RA swore I must have done it in my fever haze. I hadn't had a fever in hours. And months later, out of curiosity, I asked the head of maintenance if anybody had ever died in the inn before it became student housing. And he told me a young girl who lived there in the late 1800s had fallen down the service stairs and died. I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to think maybe she just wanted someone to keep her company up there. It's been over a decade since that year, and nothing strange has ever happened to me again. But sometimes when I hear creaky steps in an old house, I still remember those soft footsteps outside my attic door. The thing beyond the fence. Keep in mind also, I was raised Christian. I came to a conclusion that religion wasn't for me, and I decided anything supernatural must not exist as a consequence. This was the moment that shook that certainty. My cousin and I were driving back to her place in southern Pennsylvania. We both lived in that area our whole lives, weaving through those narrow country roads almost daily. It was about 1 a.m., a humid, still night. We just grabbed iced coffees and were coasting down a long, straight stretch of road. The windows were cracked, the radio humming softly. No other cars, no people, just us. As we came up on a sharp bend, it was by a wooden fence line. The headlights swept across a man standing completely still at the edge of the field. He wasn't doing anything, just staring across the road like he'd been waiting for something. He wore an old work jacket despite the heat. The moment my eyes met where his should have been, my chest tightened like I'd been plunged into icy water. I couldn't move, and I've never seen somebody who spooks easily. But the fear that rushed through me was primal, like something ancient had suddenly noticed me. It wasn't the man. I knew somehow was something behind him. Out in that dark field past the fence, it felt massive and patient, and really older than anything human. Evil isn't the right word exactly, but close. Like it wanted to draw us in, to claim us. At the exact same moment, without a word, my cousin eased off the gas, killed the music, and rolled the windows up. Drifted down the middle of the road, and we didn't even talk. For several minutes, we drove like that, not daring to look in the mirrors. The sensation was suffocating, like invisible eyes were reaching inside of me and peeling something back. When we finally turned off the main road toward our neighborhood, the feeling receded slowly, like a hand lifting off my chest. We parked in the driveway, both still silent, and I finally whispered, "Did you feel that?" She didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I couldn't breathe." We sat there another minute before I left for home. Weeks passed. Broad daylight this time, just after lunch. I passed the same stretch of road alone, and as soon as the fence line came into view, it slammed into me again. No man, no sound, no movement, but the exact same presence. And I've driven that road hundreds of times in my life. Never before that night, never after those 2 times has anything like it happened again. It wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't a bad mood. It was something else. Something that felt real and aware. Has anyone experienced anything like this? I still don't know what to call it. Demon might not be right, but it was something. Someone in the house. Hello. So, about 5 years ago, my mom, her partner, my 2 younger siblings, and I, we moved into this big, slightly worn family house in a small countryside village. The place has a creaky charm, wooden floors that groan when you walk on them, walls that seem to breathe at night. At first, I didn't think much of it. I've had odd things happen before. And back in the city, in our old apartment, there's a painting I made myself that would always slide off the wall or tilt without any reason. I thought that was spooky. But this house has a personality of its own. It started gently enough. Sometimes at night while I'm playing games or just sitting in my chair, I'd feel something lightly tugging at my hair. Yes, Gecko. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make me turn around. Nothing would be everything, blah, 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 blah. Nothing was ever there. No headphones, no loose cords, nothing. Freaked me out at first, but over time, I just got used to it. It's funny how humans can adjust to the weirdest things. There was also that balloon. My little sister had a pink balloon with no helium in it. Yet it was floating against the ceiling like it had a mind of its own. When I tried to put it down, something yanked it back up like it didn't want to let go, and I asked softly, "Can I have it?" And the balloon slowly drifted down into my hands. My mom and I just stared at each other, not terrified, just stunned. We decided to leave whatever it was alone. For years, nothing else really happened. At least nothing serious. And then about 5 months ago, my best friend moved in with me because of some family issues, and around the same time I got 2 cats. That's when things got a lot more intense. One afternoon, I'm cleaning the kitchen. I left one of the wooden cabinets wide open so it could air out. And suddenly, a pack of tissues from a completely different cabinet flew out. The door slammed shut with a force that made the plates rattle, and I froze. The air felt heavy and cold, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I just opened the cabinet again, put the tissues back, and said out loud, "It stays open, it needs to dry." And after that, it didn't happen again. My friend wasn't spared either. So one evening, she's walking down the hallway with the laundry basket. That's when a door right beside her banged loudly. The handle rattled and the door opened just a crack. She almost dropped the basket, and we both started noticing other things too. Knocks on the windows, soft steps on the wooden hallway floor even when no one was home, and that creepy feeling of being watched. Whenever we walked away from that kitchen or the tiny storage room, the lights flicker now and then, but maybe that's just the old wiring, or maybe not. And then there's this thing with my cat. One night, while she was asleep on the couch, I saw her tail lift up in the strangest way, like invisible fingers were gently pulling it. She didn't wake up, but the movement was too precise and too unnatural. I don't know why, but I felt calm watching it. I just knew it was the same presence that used to tug at my hair and play with my sister's balloon. Harmless and curious and kind. But not everything here feels kind. We think that there's 2 spirits in the house now. One warm, playful, and almost childlike. One that feels hostile. My friend believes the darker one followed her from her old job. And she used to work as a scare actor in a movie museum built in underground catacombs. She's told me about strange things that happen there at night, like glowing orbs in the security cameras and heavy footsteps in the halls, banging on the doors so hard they shook. So maybe something did follow her here. The gentle one we named Jacob, and I know naming a spirit isn't smart, but it felt wrong calling him just it. After all this time, after all. Jacob seemed to just want attention, maybe, and if you greet him, he disappeared for a few days like he just wanted to say hi. I've always been sensitive to energy, not psychic or anything like that, but I can tell when something shifts in the air. One night, my friend and I are sitting by the little fireplace in the kitchen just talking, and out of nowhere, the temperature dropped. Goosebumps. That unmistakable presence. My friend, who had been about to head to the bathroom, I think, he froze and he whispered, "I don't feel safe going in there." And I felt it too. We avoided looking at the hallway, both of us silently staring at the flames, afraid we'd see something in the shadows. Then, just as suddenly, I felt hands, warm, firm, gentle. They were resting on my shoulders, and every ounce of fear melted away. I exhaled and said quietly, "Thank you, Jacob." My friend was still shaken, so I walked her to the bathroom. And that was the last encounter so far. But the hostile one, it's still here somewhere, watching and waiting. I don't know how to get rid of it yet, but I know one thing. Jacob is on our side. And if anybody randomly gets a new subscriber, just in case the Jenga tower falls, I'm trying to subscribe to people that are normal listeners or appreciators of the channel, so if you see a little ding, even if you don't have videos, that's just me. I don't bite. Beneath the blanket. I'm 30 now, I'm a male, but when I was little, around 3 to 5 years old, I had several experiences that to this day I still can't quite explain. Honestly, part of me feels ridiculous for holding on to these memories as something real, but another part of me just can't write them off as being imagination. I'm sharing a few of these moments here because they've lingered in the back of my mind for years, and maybe somebody out there has felt something similar. And yes, I grew up Catholic. Church every Sunday, prayers every night. When I was about 3, I told my grandmother that a boy with brown hair was coming to live with us. I even mentioned the exact week. She laughed it off, and a few months later my mom gave birth to my younger brother, right in that same week. When she asked me where I'd heard that, I apparently said that he told me himself, pointed to the empty chair. Around that same time, I often played with 2 imaginary friends. They didn't feel imaginary to me then, and they'd tell me things I couldn't have known, like the name of a bird that landed on the windowsill, or the fact that my aunt had broken her favorite vase or vase, and never been to her house yet. Sometimes they just hummed softly like a lullaby. My mom often told me later how she'd find me giggling alone at night and whispering to someone no one else could hear. She'd hear light footsteps across the hallway, even though I was the only kid awake, and according to her, I called one of them Leor. I don't remember most of those nights, but there are 3 moments burned into my memory. The first was when I was climbing on the top of the old oak dresser. Absolutely not allowed, by the way. Lost my balance. It was just as I expected the floor to smash into me. I felt a soft pressure lift me midair and sat me down gently on the rug. My 4-year-old brain decided it was my lucky socks. The second happened during a family picnic. It was near a lake. My cousin pushed me off the small pier as a joke, and I sank fast. And just when panic took over, I heard a voice calm and steady saying, "Up." It's like something nudged me to the surface, and my lungs filled with air, but I swear I was still underwater. Then the last one, the one that ended everything. One night at the very beginning of spring, I woke up to the weight of something pressing down on my blanket. Slowly, I lifted my head, and at the foot of the bed stood a tall figure, shadowy. It shaped like some distorted fox or dog, with faint amber light pulsing from where its eyes should be. Its breathing was loud, and it crawled closer. I buried my face under the covers, and my heart pounding, and then mourning, like the night had folded in half and disappeared. Never had another experience like that since, but the quiet between then and now almost feels louder than the whispers I grew up with. The quiet halls of Maplewood Elementary. Last February, I was in a strange in-between stage of life. I had just left a contract job and was at home with my little boy, about 6 months old at the time. My partner had been working through my pregnancy, but lost his job not long after the baby was born. We're living temporarily at my aunt's house, trying to save up. I've got a degree in social work and some experience with kids, so I started applying anywhere that would take me. The best option that came up right away was a paraprofessional job in a special education department at Maplewood Elementary, a school just a couple of towns over. The position existed only because of the pandemic, and they needed somebody to supervise kids doing speech therapy over Google Meets. Wasn't exactly my dream job, but it was something. Basically, my job was to walk across this enormous school, grab students from their classrooms, escort them to the speech room, sit there quietly while they did their sessions online, then take them back, over and over. The building was a huge L shape, about 600 students. My little office was tucked at the end of the kindergarten wing, which meant a round trip to the 5th grade rooms could take about 15 minutes. And every single day, on the way past the main office, I'd notice this old-fashioned puppet sitting alone in a glass display case, its cloth body was floppy, had a paper mask for a face, not creepy exactly, but strange. It never moved and never changed, and no one ever mentioned it. And weird things started happening after the first few weeks. The speech room door was one of those that you had to manually lock with a key from both sides. It didn't lock on its own. Most staff, myself included, left doors unlocked when stepping out for a quick minute. But whenever I walked, maybe 30 seconds away from it, literally down the hall and back, I'd return to find the door mysteriously locked again. I tried to test it in my downtime, pulling and pushing and jiggling the knob. There was no way it could lock itself. I asked the custodian who'd been there for years, and he just shook his head and said, "Nope, that door doesn't do that on its own." Figured some staff member was messing with me, trying to prove a point or something. I told the assistant principal, and she promised to have maintenance check it. The following Monday, the door was crooked on its hinges, wouldn't even close properly anymore. Then came the bathroom incident. One afternoon, I went to pick up a student from a kindergarten class, but their schedule had changed, and I had another child with me. So I walked back to the empty classroom. Another aide nearby said she thought she saw a kid dart inside earlier. The class had a small bathroom at the back, so I checked, and empty. Turned to leave, and the bathroom door slammed shut so hard it echoed down the hallway. The little boy with me grabbed my sleeve with his eyes wide. "Probably just a draft," I muttered, even though the windows were closed and the HVAC was quiet. He whispered dead serious. "It wasn't the wind, it was a boy." A few weeks later, during early dismissal day, the wing was empty. I was in the speech room cutting laminated flashcards for the wall when somebody knocked at the door. I stood up, opened it, and no one. Hallway was silent. I sat back down, and it happened again, same thing. I wasn't frightened, but it was unsettling. I asked the custodian, half joking, "Hey, is this place haunted or what?" Without missing a beat, he said, "Oh yeah, everybody knows about Michael." Michael? He pointed toward the puppet in the display case. They named after him. My jaw dropped. Later, I asked the librarian. She lowered her voice like we were sharing a secret. "Night staff say they hear footsteps after everyone's gone. The alarm's gone off at 2 or 3 a.m. before. No one on camera, no doors, and that puppet. One year during spring break, they found it torn apart inside the case. Paper face ripped and no footage." Turns out not everyone at Maplewood even knew about the ghost. People who worked in my wing did. Folks on the other side of the building swore they'd never felt anything strange. I became Ghost Girl, always asking if anyone else had weird stories. One day at a district training, I met a para who had actually attended Maplewood years earlier. She didn't know about Michael, but she did remember a tragedy. A little boy had collapsed from a sudden heart issue during winter recess decades ago. When I walked through the hall the next day, I found it, an old framed watercolor painting of a lake. Had a brass plate underneath and said, "In loving memory of Jacob L." And when summer came, I got a better job and turned in my notice. But on my last day, I sat alone in that speech room, light pouring in through the little window, and he said softly, "Jacob, you don't have to stay here anymore." When I packed up my things, drove out to a quiet wooded spot I love, and left a small birdhouse there, just in case he wanted somewhere else to go. The 3 a.m. visit. This quote-unquote visit happened roughly 6 weeks ago. Grandfather on my father's side passed away in 2021 after years of struggling with dementia and Alzheimer's. Ouch. And for a long time, my aunt has told the family that she often dreams of her late mother-in-law. I used to brush it off, not really thinking too much about it. But in December, she told me something that stuck with me. Both she and my cousin, who had never experienced anything paranormal, had a vivid dream. They chatted with my grandfather on my mom's side, the one who passed away in May of 2022. And strangely enough, they both woke up around 3 a.m. The week after that conversation, something happened to me too. In my dream, I found myself in a big gymnasium, the kind used for school games, and I wasn't sure if it was basketball or volleyball being played, but I'm sitting halfway up the retractable bleachers, surrounded by that familiar echo of cheering and squeaking sneakers. At some point, I went to the restroom. The urinal was taken, so I stepped into a stall. After I finished and opened the door, I saw my grandfather on my dad's side. They were standing near the exit. He looked confused, not lost, but like he was searching for something he couldn't quite name. I called out, "Hey, wait, I need to talk to you." My voice was hopeful. He turned and looked at me without any sign of recognition and walked through the exit. The door shut softly behind him, and I rushed after him and opened it. There's no one in the hallway, and he looked like he just did when I saw him when I was a kid, but younger and stronger. Not the way I last saw him. A strange heaviness settled in my chest, and I guessed maybe it was the dementia still clinging to the version of him that remained. I washed my hands slowly and returned to the stands. And that's when I noticed a small group of children gathered near the top row, pointing and whispering to each other. Their eyes were fixed on someone, and then I saw him. It was my grandfather on my mom's side. He looked so full of life and exactly like I remembered from my childhood. None of the adults around seemed to notice him, only the kids were watching, and one of them asked in a soft voice, "Are you an angel?" He laughed gently and said, "I'm not sure about that, kid." I climbed the step toward him, and when I reached him, he smiled the way he always used to. That kind of smile that could make you forget everything else for at least a second. We spoke briefly, nothing complicated, just the kind of simple, warm talk that matters more than words themselves. Then he said that he had to go, and his outline started to blur like fog lifting from a field, and I panicked a little and said, "Can't you stay longer?" He chuckled again, a sound that somehow felt both real and far away. "That's not how it works," he said. Tears welled up in my dreams. He continued to fade and said, "You can visit any time," I told him. He nodded once slowly before disappearing completely, and that's when I woke up. Clock read 3:02 a.m. I lay there in the quiet, feeling strangely calm. It wasn't scary, it wasn't dark, it was gentle. But as the silence deepened, I realized my heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Never experienced anything like that before. The Woman in the Green Coat. This story is real. It happened to me when I was a kid. And even now, just thinking about it makes my chest tighten. My eyes are stinging with tears and goosebumps rise along my arms. But when I was 5 or 8 years old, I used to have what adults called night terrors. At the time, I thought it was because my parents often argued late at night, their voices echoing like thunder through thin walls. I slept in a tiny rectangular room, barely enough space for a narrow bed and a small wooden desk. A closet squeezed into the corner. The door was at the far left corner, and I remember every detail clearly, like a map burned into my mind. Almost every night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, a faint whisper would brush against my ear. It always started soft, almost like a breeze, and then grew louder and sharper until it turned into a scream. But instead of waking me up, that scream always pulled me into the nightmare. The dream was always the same, finding myself standing in the middle of a vast empty field. The ground was black, the sky was black, there was no wind, no sound, no stars, just darkness. A small stone house in the distance. Its windows glowed faintly, though there was no light inside of it. I always walked to the house, entered through the front door, and stepped out the back. and behind the house was a skyline of collapsed buildings and twisted metal and broken glass reaching toward a dead sky. And then I'd hear it, the whisper again, this time rolling toward me like a wave. A massive fireball would appear in the horizon, racing toward me as the whisper grew into that familiar scream. And that's the moment I'd wake up gasping, my body rigid, and there she would be, in the real world, in my room. The woman always stood in the same corner, the one with the closet, and her long black hair clung to her face, dripping as if she'd just walked through a storm. Her soaked green coat reached almost to the floor, and she didn't move, she didn't speak, she only stared. Every time I screamed, my parents would rush in. My mom would hold me tight, and my dad would turn on the lights. But they never saw her. They never saw the woman in the green coat who stood silently watching me. This happened night after night, year after year, until the day it stopped. It was a bright summer morning. My mom and I were walking to the supermarket downtown. She paused on the sidewalk to talk with a friend, and I was bored, kicking at the curb, looking around, and that's when I saw her across the street. The same woman, her green coat dark with water. Even under the clear blue sky, she wasn't moving, just standing there staring straight at me. I don't remember what I was thinking, or if I was thinking at all. My hand slipped from my mother's, and I stepped off the sidewalk. I crossed the first half of the road with my eyes fixed on her, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. A doctor was checking my legs, and I was bruised but not broken. My mom was crying beside me. And from that day on, I never saw the woman again. Never had another night terror. But sometimes when it rains and the wind howls against the windows, I swear I can still hear that whisper. Thank you so much for listening. Sweet dreams.
Greetings, explorers of the unknown. Join us at Paranormal M to unravel stories that defy logic. Subscribe and enable notifications to stay updated on our latest mind-bending tales. Enjoy the adventure. A simple ghost story. Do you have one like it? One summer during college, I moved into a new dorm room for about 6 weeks. A fellow student told me it was haunted. I didn't believe him, frankly, I still don't. However, it's been about 20 years and I can't deny it was an odd room, because little things kept happening. The first thing I noticed was the sound of spare change settling in my jars. Allow me to explain that. I used to keep quarters in jars so I could quickly grab a few on the way to the vending machine. I kept the lesser coins in other jars so I could take them to the coin bank when I had enough. And the first night in that room, I noticed the sound of all the coins shifting in the jars. I didn't think much of it. A simple temperature change will do that. But it kept happening all night, every night. It seems like they couldn't settle all that far in a jar that small. Then a pencil would roll off my desk. No biggie. Air conditioner draft or something. Then a poster would fall off the wall. Probably cheap tape. Then the change would rattle again. It just kept going. One night I woke up because the guy in the top bunk above me was moving around so much that it shook the whole bed. Then I remembered I was alone. I jumped up and checked, but no one was up there. Of course, that's just a dream, right? Or midnight leg spasm, surely. Overall, not a single thing was really strange about that room, but I eventually found it unsettling that the little noises and movements just kept on going. I've never heard a room make so much noise ever since. In fact, that room gets creepier the older I get, as I realize how unique that situation really was. I'm not saying it was haunted, but I am saying that I finally understand those old poltergeist stories about the house ghosts who go around touching things. Dreams that are too real. Too real. Sometimes I have these dreams when I sleep, and bear with my lack of writing luster. So I wake up in my dream and it's reality. I wake up in my bed, just as it was when I went to sleep, but time is still in this reality. When I return to my bed and body in this dream, I wake up in actual reality, but there's signs of what I did in the dream world. It's starting to freak me out more. Let's start with my oldest memory of it. I would wake up in my bunk bed and I would walk outside my house. I had this ability to basically double jump and would float and fly, kind of. I would hover myself to the playground, which was attached to the grade school behind my house, and would stargaze or move the school toys around. So when I actually woke up, I would know where my favorite toys were hiding. When I actually woke up, I had full memory of this dream. I would have dirt on my clothes, or my hair would actually be tangled, almost like it was windswept. The weirdest part is the toys sometimes would be where I hid them the following morning. Kids in our grade school didn't organize the toys after recess. We'd check in. Yes, we had a check-in and out system. And then a big trash can and go inside. Next big milestone was middle school. I had similar dreams with the floating ability, except it wasn't the playground or toys. I would instead now just float to the retention pond area next to my house and would just look up at the stars from atop the giant willow tree. It was my favorite spot, and I would frequent this place. Now with this one, only like twice out of 100 times I found willow leaves in my bed with me. This continued for years until high school, when my stress and depression was so bad I stopped dreaming altogether. I talked about it with a therapist during high school who said I was most likely sleepwalking. However, I disproved that easily by tying myself to the bed, setting up bells on my doors and windows, and asking my parents if they've ever noticed me sleepwalking. The answer was no, and none of my safeguards ever moved or changed the mornings when I woke up. I'm now 27, married, and living with my husband, and my dreams have returned here or there. I quote-unquote wake up my husband next to me. Our cats are on our bed, and now for some reason I'm floating around aimlessly and feel miserable and lost. I look up and it's just this hazy purple-black sky with no stars anymore. I begin to feel extremely detached and almost warp back to my body and actually wake up feeling exhausted, drained, and empty. I've noticed bruises forming on my back and legs more often too, like 3 bruises in either a straight line or a triangle-like pattern. Unsure if related or not, just thought I'd put that here too. It's so odd because if I don't have these dreams, I'm extremely happy, healthy, and doing great. What the hell did I just experience? I'm right now in our family cabin in the middle of a forest in Sweden. I'm in a bed on the first floor while my parents are on the other side of the house, and some relatives are on the second floor. We're celebrating Christmas here, and we'll be here for additionally 4 more days. Okay, so I fell asleep around 12 a.m. and I woke up at 1:30 a.m. feeling absolutely amazing. I'm doing a lot of inner shadow work, and last night relieved massive amounts of things that I've been holding on to. I was feeling completely at peace, almost blissful, and I called for my cat. He jumped on me and purred like never before, obviously feeling my good vibes. I pet him for about 5 minutes as he suddenly jumps down from me and stops purring. At the same time, I start feeling some weird feelings in my throat, almost like electricity. The air got more dense and the temperature in the room was suddenly a lot colder. My cat jumps up on my chest again and I pet him when he starts to purr again. In the dull light in the room, I can see the mirror in the door that's half opened. My cat can see something. His head is turned to different spots in the room. Not only where the doors are, but on the other side of my bed as well. Not only that, there's strange sounds in the room like it can be when staying inside of an old house like this, from 1850-ish. When it's windy outside, but it's not. It's silent and still, but the sounds are there and my cat looks at the exact same spot as the sounds come. I have goosebumps all over my body. Next thing that happens is that I see small, subtle light balls in the room. One in the mirror, one that comes around the door from the outside, and one more inside of the room. They're almost green and very subtle, but I can see them. The air is thick and it's almost hard to breathe, and I barely manage to be grounded and not freak out. I'm about to go up and turn on the light, but decide to be still and see what happens. My body feels almost electric and tense, and the room is cold. Hard to breathe, feels like breathing electricity in. Suddenly it stops and my cat jumps down and leaves the room. It's still cold in here, and I'll have to take a sleeping pill if I'm ever going to be able to sleep. I'm a bit scared, but I'm okay, and because the dense air, lights, and sound is gone, I feel safe. My cat surely protected me there, thank God. It helped a lot even though he was staring at something in the room, freaking me out. What could it have been? I have never, ever experienced something like this. I'm happy it's over and have to say I'm proud of myself for managing to be so calm during whatever this was. What just happened to me? I live in Peoria, Arizona, and currently am on summer break, after my first year at university. And I love to take walks around the neighborhood with my little brother, and also the back of the house, which has all sorts of dirt trails. Last night, 5/8, I decided to take a walk around 11 p.m., just to stroll around the block. It lasted about 25 minutes and the weather had a soft breeze. My little brother didn't accompany me because he had fallen asleep. A few hours later, this is just 2 hours ago, 5/9, I got bored and decided, why not? Why not take another walk? Sounded fun and the weather was perfect, and this time I took a different route. A dirt road with no light. I did have a flashlight. That LED sort of led to an adjacent neighborhood. I took a walk around the new neighborhood and then went back to the dirt road that led to my neighborhood. This dirt trail has some brush right at the beginning of the way down. Now at this point, I had not seen a single person and it was 3 a.m. Just some cars whizzing by every now and then. As I begin to go around this brush to the dirt neighborhood, I notice a man walking up the dirt road towards me. Now he's not that far behind the brush, maybe only 15 feet away from me. At this point, everything happened so fast as we're walking down and up each opposite end of each other. Now this guy was 15 feet away from me, so of course I was going to say something like, "Have a good night," or "Later, bro." But as I stop, he keeps walking towards me, and I repeatedly say, "Hey," to him, trying to get an acknowledgement. But this man, mind you, he looks like he's a mid-30s wearing flannel and hat, walks right through my body. I mean, literally, it's like he just phased through me. This scared the living shit out of me because I knew I just saw a bearded man with a hat covering his face walk through my body. It is unexplainable. Suddenly I felt adrenaline and pulled out my knife. I turned around and I see nobody there. Then I pull out my flashlight and aim it at his direction to see nothing but brush. I wanted to run home, but something in my mind was fascinated. But that feeling was nothing compared to the fear. And so I started walking back down the dirt road to my home as I heard voices from probably neighbors. Then I instinctively look back behind me again, wouldn't you? And I see the same man as he starts to dance like a weirdo. At this point, I'm spooked and I start speed walking home with knife and flashlight in hand. And as I look back with the light again, he's still dancing creepily, but not walking toward anywhere. I sprint a little bit more down the road and turn my head and he's gone. To me, I don't know if this is explainable. When his body went through mine, I felt a cold breeze. Does anyone have any ideas on how this man walked through me, didn't say a word to me, and then danced near the brush? Maybe I just experienced a supernatural presence for the first time. Either way, I am doing that walk again every single day till I see something like that happen. Ask Reddit. I grew up in rural South Carolina. My mother comes from a family that's had several experiences with the paranormal. She would always tell me about her experiences growing up in her mother's house. For whatever reason, the paranormal experiences didn't stop with my grandmother or my mother, because I too had several run-ins with the paranormal while growing up directly across from my grandmother's house. When I was around the ages of 3 to 5, both of my parents worked long hours. So I would have to babysit my mom's first cousin, a woman who had been known to be trouble on the family. But my parents reluctantly allowed her to babysit me out of financial convenience. While she would babysit me along with her own stepdaughter, who was my age, she would abuse me verbally and emotionally. If I didn't want to eat, she would call me horrible names and make the girl laugh at me and call me names along with continuous verbal and mental abuse. As a child, I remember it being traumatizing, and I thought she was the meanest person I had ever met. However, as a small child, I was never able to articulate her actions to my parents to the point where they could really understand my fear of her. During the times that I would be babysat by this woman, things started getting weird. Several times when I would walk into my dark bedroom, or even a dark hallway, a tall, short-haired woman with glasses would appear to me out of nowhere. It was almost like she would rise up from the floor and just stare at me. I don't think she ever said anything to me, but it was like she wanted to talk to me. But I'd always just run out of the room as fast as I could once I got out of my frozen in fear state. The thing is, I would become so paralyzed with fear that I would block it out of my mind almost immediately to try to convince myself that it wasn't real. These sightings happened numerous times over those few years, and I still remember it vividly. I never told anybody about this until a few years ago when I told my mom. I described the woman with enough detail that she said, "That sounds like your great Aunt Maddie who passed away before you were born." It just so happens that Maddie was the mother of the woman who was babysitting me, the woman that many in our family believed that she had something to do with Maddie's mysteriously quick death. That Christmas, when I was about 20, after I told my mother about this, she told me to tell her sister, my aunt, about my story. I began to describe what I saw, the tall woman with short hair and glasses. My aunt also confirmed that I was seeing my great Aunt Maddie. That night they showed me the old pictures of her for the first time, and sure enough, I was looking at old photographs of the woman who used to appear to me as a child. A woman who several other members of my mother's family has reported seeing over the years after her death. I truly believe that to this day she was appearing to me to protect me from her daughter. My shadow guardian and everything he told me before he left. Now that that's out of the way, I want to talk about Thomas. I haven't seen or heard from him in a year, but originally found him in an abandoned city outside the Bell Witch Cave. I was a Freemason's building, or it was a Freemason's building, I'm sure, and me and the friends I took had to climb into the second-story window. We had planned to go to the cave, but didn't realize it was seasonal, So instead, I had the awesome idea to just bring a Ouija board, light candles, and do the whole seance thing and talk to whatever was outside of the cave. A few minutes after we set up, whatever it was did not want us playing with it. I had driven almost 2 hours to get there, so we persisted. I've been to many, many haunted places in my life, but never before had I been yanked by my arm by something as a sign to get the hell out. I'll leave a bunch of details here in between, but fast forward and the shadow figure I was once afraid of had suddenly become a 9-foot guardian and informant. Most mediums can connect with the living and the non-living, whereas I can't. I can only connect with the dead and to a limited degree. Thomas helped me fill that gap in my mind, and was able to show me images that connected to other people asking me for advice. One night I was helping a friend who was out of state, and he asked me to ask some questions about Thomas himself. Thought it was a cool little idea since I didn't know much about him or shadow people in general. Here's where it gets strange, but try to keep reading or listening. When you meditate, the highest level is an area I call the void of the mind. It's dark, you can do whatever you'd like, and you're a beacon. I do this when I'm looking for spirits or trying to channel. Thomas claimed that he was, quote-unquote, born of the void. He explained that there are many more like him, but he was part of a separate mindset of a different mindset of entities. There were the ones who fed on human energy and incited fear and sadness to receive it. Then there were ones who traveled with humans to high-volume energy, as he put it. Places like funeral homes, nightclubs, schools, and other compressed areas is where they would reside. Specifically, Thomas hung around the cave when it was open to feed off the fear the cave-goers experienced, then retreated into the abandoned city to retain his energy until the next season. Because Thomas travels by the void, he can go anywhere at any time, but obviously prefers to be away from the sunlight, and they typically won't share a space with another shadow person, unless it's a territorial problem. He also told me that they cannot die as people do. They fizzle up when they grow weak, and they cease to exist. The lower class shadow people, Thomas was about a middle in my opinion, typically get absorbed by other entities, separate species of malevolent energy. His voice gets picked up by a spirit box as well, as one time me and my friends were being berated by something and somebody yelled over them, "Shut up and you shut your mouth." Glanced over and Thomas was popping his head through the wall. He protected me insistently, and many things wouldn't even dare approach when Thomas was around. Little random fun fact. Sometimes Thomas was not physically present, but he could be in separate places all at once. He was there, but he wasn't, if that makes any sense. Home invasion. My childhood best friend, we'll call her Nikki, came to stay with me for the week of my birthday. As teenagers, we would pull all-nighters and sleep all day. My ex-boyfriend, and we're going to call him Jay, was supposed to come over. The place was for Jay to come over, or rather the plan was for Jay to come over around 7 or 8 in the morning and hang out. Not sure why that sounded so exciting at the time. Now I'm here looking at it like, it's so lame. Anyway, it started to hit around 8:30 a.m. and Nikki and I were starting to get tired from our all-nighter. So we decided to try and watch a movie to keep ourselves awake. Even though it was 2015, my mom still had one of those old combo TVs that were popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. You know, the ones with the combined DVD and VHS features. It's slightly important to the story that I add that I had Titanic on VHS, and the VHS version is 2 separate tapes due to its length. About 45 minutes to an hour into the movie, I texted Jay and asked him where he was, just due to him being late. He said he was riding his skateboard to my house, since his mom wouldn't give him a ride and he was 30 minutes away. It was time for me to put the second tape in, but before I could, Nikki and I heard the doorknob of the front door jiggle pretty aggressively for a quick second. Now, it's important to note I always made sure everything was constantly locked due to the anxiety of someone breaking in. This included the screen door. Nikki and I looked at each other completely confused, and we were 100% convinced that he was trying to scare us. So I called him to see if I'd hear his phone ring outside. I didn't, but when he answered, I surely heard all the traffic. He was riding by. That was a dead giveaway that it wasn't him at the door. He also said it would be another 10 minutes. I looked at Nikki, she looked at me, and then the doorknob started jiggling again. I ran across the room and locked the bedroom door and the bathroom door. The knob was still shaking like crazy, and Nikki and I started to fully freak the fuck out. I called my mom while she was at work, and she was crying how scared we were and asking her to call the police to come to the house. Once she answered the phone, the jiggling stopped. She was making the same assumption that Jay was pranking us, but after I told her the situation, she started getting worried. The next thing I know, I hear a slam and heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor in the living room, pacing around. Nikki and I are both completely frozen and stopped talking, which freaked my mom out. She kept yelling into the phone asking what the hell was going on, and out of fear of someone being in the house, I hung up on her. The footsteps stopped for about 10 seconds, and then stomp, stomp, stomp. I was running down the hallway and stopped at the door. The knob started jiggling like how you'd see in a horror movie. Nikki started crying and saying, "I thought you said you locked the doors, Kay, and now someone's in your house." The jiggling stops. The footsteps are pacing up and down the hall, and we start hearing what sounded like somebody rummaging through the kitchen. I paused and looked at her with my eyes tearing up from the fear. "I did." She then said, "Wait, we didn't even hear the screen door, and that door's really loud." Our chat was interrupted by Jay calling me. I answered the phone whispering, and he said that he was there and asked if I could unlock the screen door because he went to open it and couldn't open. I looked at Nikki and said, "Here's what we're going to do. Jay's outside right now. We're going to open the door and we're going to run." She nodded, and we both visibly shaking like leaves in the process. I undid the lock, threw the door back, and we both took off running down the hallway to the front door, unlocked the deadbolt and knob, unlocked the screen, and Jay was standing on the porch. We ran right past him and into the middle of the front yard. Jay asked what was wrong, and we both said somebody was inside. He immediately went into the house and looked in the kitchen, the laundry room, and every bedroom. He came out and said no one was in there at all. Feeling a little bit more comfortable, all three of us walked back into the house. I went to the laundry room to check the back door. It was deadbolted, and the knob was locked. I looked at Nikki and Jay and said, "No one's here and the deadbolt's locked." Nikki said, "They could have locked it when they went out the back." I said, "No, Nikki, they couldn't have. The deadbolt locks from inside." I called my mom back and told her the rest of what happened. She was sobbing hysterically that we were okay. Once again, words will never describe how scared we both were. So vulnerable due to not having a weapon and even being afraid to escape out the window if there was actually somebody in the house. But I know for a fact it wasn't an actual person, since this had happened months ago with my friend Mandy. Except when it happened with Mandy, all we heard was footsteps. Whatever spirit this was starting to seem more aggressive. Paranormal bathroom break. When I was in middle school, my parents sent me off to summer sleepaway camp. Your standard outdoor adventure, song singing, marshmallow roasting shit show. I was not a willing participant. Don't get me wrong, I love the outdoors, but a month away from home, my Tamagotchi collection, and my own bed was not my cup of tea at 12. The layout of the campground was fairly standard. To my recollection, there was a large mess hall, a ball pit, ropes of course, and a winding path leading up to 6 cabins that we called home. The cabin closest to everything was the bathrooms. The rest were all boy and girl separated housing. The weirdest thing about this layout, though, were the front doors to the cabins all faced away from the main path and towards the woods. Though it was easy to find your way around, it was definitely daunting when you had to go to a midnight stroll to go use the restroom. And that's really where our story begins, with my small bladder, my anxious mind, and a walk to the woods to go pee. When you had to use the restroom, it was a short trail along the right side of the cabin to a dirt path that led towards the larger buildings. At night, this path was lined with large construction lights and volunteer counselors that made sure none of the campers got any nightly shenanigans underway. It was very easy to find, heavily illuminated, and though still mildly terrifying, completely safe. It was also one of my biggest camp fears. I woke up roughly around 2 a.m. and couldn't wait until morning to pee. I was not happy. Walking out into the cold air, staring straight into the woods, and accepting my fate of an uncomfortable nightly stroll. The small path around the right of the cabin led directly to the larger dirt path, and though facing away from the lights, was still fairly easy to visualize. I made sure I was properly equipped with flashlight in hand and started my journey. Just a few steps, when it happened, everything went black. I mean, completely black. I couldn't see my hand directly in front of me black. I stumbled forwards, wondering if maybe the lights went out. My hands just hadn't adjusted. My eyes hadn't adjusted either. I knew where the path was, and I was flailing. But the more I walked, the more twigs and sticks I felt sliding against my legs. The further I went, the higher they became. I stopped. It had been about 2 minutes of walking, and I still couldn't see a thing. That's when I noticed the noise had also stopped. The drone of the forest. You know, the crickets chirping, your standard late-night ambient noise. It wasn't there. I panicked and turned. 2 steps toward the way I came, and all of a sudden I was back and standing directly in front of the door of my cabin. The lights illuminated the cabin itself, the trees swaying in the night air. Everything seemed normal again. Thinking I was dreaming or attempting to block out whatever the fuck I just experienced, I walked forward again towards the right. My will to pee was too strong to contemplate anything else. And then, darkness. I was surrounded by nothing. The more I walked, the more I felt the woods surrounding me, but I still couldn't see. I turned more quickly this time, running towards the direction I believed the cabin to be in, and I was at the front door. My flashlight was gone. Now, one typically, after an experience like this, would not make the decision to continue attempting the midnight stroll to the bathhouses. I did. I felt smarter about it this time for sure, trailing my fingers along the right side of the cabin as I attempted to make the turn onto the larger dirt path one more time. Nothing disappeared. I rounded the corner, got the helpful nod from the counselor on duty, and made my way into the bathroom and back with no further issue. When I curled up in bed, I chalked it all up to a dream. My mind playing tricks on me, and in the morning my cabin counselor did too, until she saw my legs. I was rushed off to the nurse for the large mud-covered gashes, multiple bug bites, and unexplained rash. To this day, I still don't know what I experienced, or if it was even paranormal in nature, but I remembered the quiet, the black, and the wonder. Does anyone know what could have happened to me that night? Or has anybody had a similar experience? Not the crone, but maybe her counterpart. I debated even posting, but it's 4 a.m. and I'm afraid to fall back asleep. Hoping for some genuine insight. I chose the title only because of a documentary premiere I recently saw. The film was about a female spirit, and I'm definitely getting aggressive male energy, but it's a long shot and I couldn't think of anything better. I did have a couple weird dreams and some panicky thoughts after, but I'm dealing with something I've never had happen before. Last night I had a dream where I was on my couch talking to a friend, and her eyes got really wide. When I looked on the balcony, there was this huge deformed figure on the porch. As soon as I turned around, it noticed, so I went to hide in the bathroom. I know. Without being super graphic, this thing came in and I met a very violent end, which I felt every second of, by the way. Normally, I can chalk these dreams up to something, but I felt weird even coming in my room today. About 30 minutes ago, I woke up from another dream. This male figure is starting to look very human now. There were about 4 or 5 different scenarios where it kept trying to take something or make me take something or make me drink something. But anytime I would figure it out, everyone would reset, like in a movie. Scene 1 didn't work, so we'll try scene 2 type of a thing. He had a wife and daughter, and I remember her telling me to get back in the car after I figured out the last one. The last thing I remember is being in an office trying to get someone to help me. They gave me a drink, but it had something metal in it. I woke up gagging, felt like I swallowed something. My dream shapeshifter is back. I had a dream I was at my friend's, but she lived in a huge apartment with all glass windows. I was walking down a long hallway and saw a man breaking in, so I ran to get a weapon and she said, "I got it." I still went to grab something, but when I got to them, they were already standing off. She grabbed lighter fluid and doused him and lit the flame, but before it got him, he grabbed her. They both started burning and he said that he wasn't dying alone. I managed to help her get away and call 911. When I turned around, he was gone, but there were pieces of flesh on the floor. They took us both to the hospital. I was looking for her and she was talking to a caseworker whose face kept shifting. It looked like a normal human, but it couldn't get its face right. It kept shifting from male to female in an almost fluid way. I got angry and asked why they weren't talking to me. She was in pain and I was the one who saw everything. The quote-unquote person got someone else to get me and put me with other burn patients. I don't remember getting burned. I woke up crying. I've actually never seen faces in dreams until these past 3. I've always known who they were generally supposed to be, but never saw actual faces. I'm afraid to tell my family because I don't want to upset them. And I also don't want them to think I'm completely insane, which is how I'm feeling at the moment. Fire alarm ghost. In the last few weeks, my fire alarm has been randomly going off, and I think it's a ghost. It all started a few weeks ago while in my kitchen. The downstairs fire alarm started going off. I assumed it was a fire and I panicked. I ran downstairs, but there was no smoke. I got the alarm down and pushed the button for hush mode. It would quiet for a few seconds and then it started again. I was getting increasingly worked up, extremely noise sensitive, you could say, and kind of yelled helplessly, "Please stop." And it immediately stopped. The second time happened 2 weeks ago. I was sleeping and at exactly 3 a.m. I woke up to the alarm going off downstairs. Or so I thought. I got up and ran down, panicking again, thinking there was a fire. My cat was in danger. But when I got halfway down the stairs, the alarm wasn't coming from there. I was so disoriented from the abrupt wake-up that I went back upstairs and it wasn't coming from there either. And then it just stopped. My house is quite small and only has 2 alarms. The third time I was mid-shower. Alarm is outside the bathroom, with the door locked. The alarm went off and when I jumped out, the bathroom door was open. Took it down and pushed the hush button and it wouldn't turn off for about 10 minutes. I was in tears, having a panic attack, and it just stops again. After I finished my shower, standing in the bathroom, the locked door opened again. 4th time was this morning. Sitting in my office, the alarm starts. I can see it from my desk, and I got up and brought my chair over to hit the button, and just as I'm about to touch it, it stops again. At this point, it feels like some cruel game. Every time it goes off, I get hit with this wave of insane panic. House fires are one of my oldest and deepest fears. I feel like I'm being toyed with. It never happens when other people are around, too. Before anyone suggests it's the battery, it's both alarms. And they're 10-year alarms that were replaced a little over a year ago. The low battery has a specific beep and says low battery. The fire alarm double beeps and says fire in English and French. And this is what keeps going off. It is not a CO2 detector. The story of a drowned landlord. It all started in 2019. I and 8 other people created an organization dedicated to the history of our city. The town is no larger, only 18,000 people, plus adjacent villages. In one of the villages, a few months later, we were invited to a village where the landowner Zembrodsky lived. People told stories that they constantly see a landowner walking by the river, and that he cannot calm down until he drowns someone. Fortunately, the landowner's estate itself was destroyed, and the new houses had already appeared in its place. But we still walked along the river. And to be honest, I'm a person who's skeptical about ghost stories, but walking there was unpleasant. I was tormented by some kind of unpleasant feeling of anxiety. History haunted us, and we started digging through the archives. As it turned out, in the 1800s, the landowner Zembrodsky actually lived there, who drowned in the river near the estate. But what became surprising was that 30 years later, in the 1850s, another person was drowning in the same place, and after a while, another and another. And so the last person who drowned there turned out to be my grandmother's nephew, about whom we don't talk much. I kind of knew that he drowned, but I didn't know where it happened. The details were that 2 children, 5 and 6 years old, were walking in winter. But then they went to a river, which was about 1.5 kilometers from the house. A man passing by saw 2 floundering boys and ran to save them. He managed to grab one and somebody pulled the other way. The second boy said that they went to look at his uncle, who was walking along the river, and he didn't remember what happened next. To this day, he doesn't tell the details of that day. This is where our research ends for now. I don't know if it was a paranormal phenomenon or if there's an explanation for everything, but as a historian, I liked the story, because thanks to it, we have on our lips the names of people who died tragically. Priest. The next story will tell about a priest whose story began in 1883 when he was appointed rector of the Archangel Michael Church in the village of Katsakatsia, Lopan. The priest was very loved, and many warm memories of him are still preserved. But in 1918, change came. The revolution and civil war brought a terrible time when brother stood up against brother. The village passed from hand to hand like a leaf in the wind. In December of 1918, a gang came to the walls of the priest's house. They were interested in church values. The priest refused to hand them over, and he was severely tortured. But he remained silent. The bandits dragged him onto the street and killed him right in front of his house on December 28th. He was buried in a local cemetery, but unfortunately, the grave has not survived. Local residents say that from time to time the sounds of church chants can be heard from this house, as if they continue to sound forever. But sometimes, especially at night, when someone passes by the house, they catch the smell of incense, which brings back memories of the priest. Another mysterious aspect of the story is that some claim to have seen an old man with a large beard sitting on the porch of the house. These unusual phenomena give this story even more mystery and mysticism. While we were looking around the house and talking, suddenly the door inside the house slammed shut by itself. Whether this was a paranormal event or just a draft, we can't say for sure. But for me, it was an amazing discovery, since the story became a valuable addition to our collection. The Man on the Stairs. I grew up in a 60s, 70s house, about 45 minutes outside London. It was your usual creaky floorboard, barely carpeted sort of place. The first time we saw the man on the stairs, it was me. I was around 10 at that time, and I used to dry my hair on the landing, next to the banister, which had slats so you could see through it. I had my hair flipped over my head, and I saw who I thought was my dad, in his raincoat and carrying his briefcase, walking up the stairs. I flipped my hair back over to give him a hug like I usually did, but he wasn't there. I assumed he'd turned around and gone back downstairs, so I ran down and asked Mom where he'd gone. Only she told me that he wasn't home yet. I felt a bit creeped out, but it obviously went out of my head and I didn't really come up with it again. The next time I heard about him, I was 18. I'd met my now husband maybe a year before, and my parents had divorced by this point, so it tended to be my mom in the house with us there in the week. One Sunday morning, I got a call from her, asking if I was okay. I assured her that I was, and asked her what was wrong, and she said that there had been banging on the front door at 3 in the morning. Our front door had 2 frosted glass panels, top and bottom, so you could make out shapes through it. And we had a street lamp opposite which lit it during the night. When she came to the top of the stairs to have a glance and see if she could see anything, she said she saw someone with a bag, waiting. She started downstairs and stopped herself. She turned back to her bedroom and looked down toward the glass porch. We couldn't see anyone. When she went back to the top of the stairs, they had vanished. She thought we had an argument and I'd come home since they were carrying a bag. But once she started playing it in her head, she realized the person was taller than me, a bigger build, and was wearing a raincoat. The only other time I heard about him was from my brother. Now, he's very scientific. He doesn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal at all, which is what amazed me even more. When he was younger and still living at home, he used to stay up until the late hours playing Xbox, like you do. And one night he finished up, didn't bother turning on any lights, went to the bottom of the stairs and started walking up when he saw him. A man in a raincoat and a briefcase standing at the top of the stairs. He blinked a couple of times and stepped back to the 2 steps and tried to click on the light. And when he looked back, he was gone. The weird thing here is that me and my mom never mentioned anything to him, as he's very vocal about how daft he thinks all this is, but the description was perfect. We never found out who he was. As far as we could find out, nobody died at that house. My mother passed away in 2020, and we sold the house. So I always wonder if they're seeing him or if he moved on without her. Or with her. I got pushed out of a place I was staying at. I was living in San Diego when this happened. My mother, myself, and her boyfriend decided to stay at his mother's house while we were looking for a place of our own. I was staying in a room that was attached to the hallway, which leads to the front door. In the room there was a lamp, a TV, and a bed. The bed had wheels, meaning that it could be moved out if needed. So I was fully in bed when the paranormal activity started. It was small at first, with strange feet movements on the sheets like an animal was walking on top of them. But the mother had no animals. I tried to ignore it for I believe, and that giving the ghosts attention would just make things worse. That didn't work, because the next thing to happen was creaking noises from the wheels, as if someone was moving the bed. The bed wasn't being moved, though. I had turned on the lamp and the TV to try to calm myself down. That didn't really stop anything, though, because the sounds were still happening. My mother had noticed the light on and maybe heard the TV because she opened the door and came in. She didn't seem to notice the sounds because she had just told me to go to sleep. I was having trouble staying awake and had fallen asleep when the animal movement had returned. Something told me to open my eyes. I don't know what, but I did. And when I did, I saw that I wasn't in the room anymore. I was in the hallway. The bed had been moved there by some unseen force. The bed where I had my feet were facing the open front door. Then it ran with the bed in its hands towards the front door, basically pushing me and the bed out to the dark outside. I woke up and I was in the room again. The noise and animal movements had stopped. After this, everything was fine. I hadn't had an experience since this one. One last thing. I asked the mother about the room I was in. She had told me her husband used the room before he died. She then told me that she had events happen in the home since then. When she had visitors stay in the room, her husband would mess with them to scare them out. I don't know why I'd forgotten that detail till now, but I thought I'd put that here too. Weird stuff during second shift, and I'm still at work. So I work armed security in a rich neighborhood near Fort Worth, filled with old houses. Specifically, I work at 2 houses. One is occupied by a widowed lady in her 70s, while the second house is unoccupied. Co-workers and the lady herself have reported seeing and feeling apparitions in the first house. I haven't heard of anything in the second house until tonight. I'm still here. I'll be off in a little over 30 minutes. We have cameras all over the place that we're supposed to observe for any abnormal movement or activity. Usually, all I see are the occasional raccoons or squirrels. Tonight has been different, though. One camera in particular looks towards a set of oak doors. This is one of the only 2 that doesn't kick over the night vision when it gets dark. There's 4 trees in view, as well as some shrubbery. It's a calm night here. No wind, no rain, nothing. Periodically, I've seen one particular branch start shaking violently, like something is grabbing a fruit tree trying to make stuff fall to the ground, right? And this is right above where there's been a shadow in the brush. It's not the brush itself. I can see through all the leaves to the wall, since the brush isn't that thick. The shadow is in the form of someone standing there. Whenever I go out there with my flashlight to look, the vigorous shaking stops and the shadow isn't there. Keep in mind, there's no wildlife moving about in this part of the property. They're always in the back, where there's the least amount of movement. I walk back there every couple of hours, but that's about it. The part where I'm seeing the movement is in the driveway, where my truck is parked. I'm the only one here. My relief shows up at midnight. At one point, I saw what looked like the shadow bending over and reaching down for something and then standing back up. Whenever I go out there, I talk, whether to myself or to whatever entity is moving about here. I'm not sure if I should be talking to it because I don't want to make it think I'm instigating it. This kind of stuff scares the shit out of me. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or other stuff like that. My brain has always tried to explain it away, or see some rational reason behind whatever's happening. But this stuff is beyond my explanation. My mind plays worst-case scenarios crap over and over, making me even more scared. I'm afraid something will actually appear, something will interact with my voice when I'm out there. I talk because it calms me, though. I don't know what to think of it. I just want to get the hell out of here for the night, and then I worry about What if whatever this nonsense is attaches itself to me and follows me home? Ugh, my brain hates me. Shadow People, Southern Nevada. So other than with my friends and family, this is the first time I'm sharing this story. Full disclosure. Before this experience, I've always been very skeptical of paranormal experiences, and a very, you could say, quotes, there's always another explanation for those things type of person. Anyways, this takes place in summertime, 4 years ago, if my memory serves me correctly. On a trip starting in the Las Vegas area of Southern Nevada and ending in Mammoth Lakes, California. My husband, then boyfriend, and I were taking a road trip, so I could show him one of my favorite camping and hitchhiking places in California, and I was so excited to do so. It's a moderately long drive, but I'd done it before, and it wasn't really worrying me. It was later in the day when we left, after we had both gotten off work for the weekend. The beginning half of the drive was normal, just like any other drive. But once we reached the town of Beatty, it got really weird. Really fast. After reaching, could be Beatty or Beatty, Beatty, you guys. After reaching Beatty, we both started feeling really uncomfortable, and for a brief moment couldn't figure out why. Shortly after, we started seeing figures that looked like dark, stretched-out silhouettes of people in the path of our headlights. They would appear to run in and out of our sight in the road, and then disappear very shortly, before making contact with them with the car. They would not appear behind us on the ground, so we knew there was no contact made. It was a constant barrage of them, and I didn't know what to think of this. At first, I thought it was someone playing a prank on us, but it continued on for an hour. We didn't stop, because by the time it was dark out, I was too scared that it would end up being a ruse for a dangerous situation, i.e. a serial killer or carjacking or something worse. We also smelled the very distinct smell of fire or burning. Due to the silhouettes that we'd been seeing, we were far too afraid to stop and see what it could be, so we kept driving to our destination. The smell persisted for the entirety of the drive there from Beatty. It never waned. We finally got to Mammoth. We debated back and forth on whether we should go out and check underneath the hood to make sure the smell wasn't something from our actual engine or something. It was pitch black outside. At this point, we were so terrified we actually considered just driving back home entirely. The smell of burning was incredibly strong and had no discernible source inside the car. Eventually, I got out and went to check outside the car, found no trace of the smell outside. We determined that the smell had to be coming from something inside the car and started investigating more. After a while, we located the source as a blanket that was between two other blankets in a stack that we had brought. The top and bottom blankets were ice cold and had no odor. The middle blanket smelled so strongly of smoke that it burned my nose to sniff it. It was very hot to the touch, too. We had no explanation for this. Scared but not sure what else to do, we dropped the quote-unquote weird blanket outside the car, locked the doors, and went to sleep. After doing so, we didn't experience anything else. We aren't sure if this is just a coincidence or not. We stayed and enjoyed the rest of our trip, and after a day we pretty much forgot about the experience until it was time to head back home. On our way back home, this time during the daylight, we passed a house in Beatty that looked like it had been burned down, covered in graffiti of various symbols and images that looked to be sigils, possibly. I wish I had the thought to grab a picture at the time, admittedly, but I was driving and just wanted to get home. We've always wondered if something at that house is what caused our experience. My best friend owns property there, and when I went back to the town with her, we couldn't find that house. She mentioned that there had recently been some kind of project to clean up the town and removed abandoned buildings, and I wonder if it had been removed already. To this day, we aren't sure what we experienced. A friend of my husband suggested that it could have been several things, shadow people being one of them. After looking into it a bit, I think they could be right, but I don't know enough about these types of things to be certain. Has anyone else had any similar experiences around that area of Nevada? Any ideas what this could have been? I still can't explain this happening to me. So this happened to be a few years ago, but I always mention this story to friends and family. When I was about 18, I was still living with my mom. We have a normal 2-bedroom home in Scotland. My dad passed away when I was 16, and I had some stories that revolve around him, but this one I don't think is related. So it's probably about 12 or 1 p.m., and I'm drifting off to sleep slowly until I hear 2 voices. A female and male voice whispering in my hallway outside of my room. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand. They sounded like they were talking on my stairs. Now, I've never heard any outdoor noises through my bedroom door. If it was my neighbors talking, I would 100% hear them through my bedroom window, and this sounded direct, like there wasn't much space between us at all. At this point, I'm hoping that my mom didn't turn off the radio and TV downstairs. I get up from my bed and the talking doesn't stop as I do this, and I go to my wardrobe where I take out the only thing I thought of, my fencing sword. Really embarrassing choice now that I think about it. You can't actually do much harm with it. I think it's cool. I stepped up to the door and the talking didn't stop. It sounded like a European language, maybe German, Turkish, or something. I live in Scotland and I speak English, Polish, and Spanish, and it didn't sound like anything I'd recognize. I even heard the seeking of the stairs, as if somebody was slowly moving around on them. I genuinely at this point mentally prepared myself to face 2 intruders. I swung the door open, there was nothing, silence. I ran up to the hallway window. Nobody was outside. No neighbors, no nothing. I ran downstairs. Nothing's on, everything's off. Complete silence. All doors locked, etc., etc. Needless to say, I barely slept that night. I've been thinking about it to this day, and what trips me out is how I consistently heard them. From the bed to the wardrobe to the door. I couldn't hear noises that whole time, and I can guarantee you I was wide awake. Weird dream turned out to be a 9/11 nightmare. I've been having visions and dreams of spirits for 40 years, even seeing stuff that made me question reality. This particular dream happened in 2011, 10 years past 9/11 in 2001. In my dream, I saw a woman with brown hair and dressed conservatively, with very pretty earrings on. The jewelry really struck me for some reason. As we went forward in the dream, she moved to a desk facing a large outside window. She sat down and suddenly I was seeing through her eyes. I saw an unusual vision of blue sky followed by the nose of an airplane coming to the window, then into the building. The dream blacked out and I woke up shaking, hot in my bed. I looked up at my bedroom window and heard a voice say, It was quick and painless. I just needed someone to know. I got up and sketched out the image. I saw her and the jewelry in particular. I also wrote down the name I saw. Just a first name, but also initials. I also knew the type of company that she worked for and roughly where she would have been located. I did some research over the next week and I found her, the company and the floor that matched my vision. I can only think that because I also have an affinity for the same type of jewelry and I'm sensitive. I was able to hear her and let her know that she was remembered, not forgotten. Every year since, I have the feeling from the dream aftermath come over me and remember her by just lighting a candle and saying a little prayer for her.